Hello, everyone. Welcome. As I see people filtering in, I'll repeat a couple of things just for the first minute or two. I know we have around 100 or so people who've registered. Um, I will be recording this presentation, so don't worry if you're zoning out or doing something else at the same time because you'll get a recording, and you'll also get the slides. And you'll also probably receive some either personalized emails from me or some of my colleagues to see if you might want to follow up on OSF for institutions for your institution. So for those of you just joining, I was just saying you'll be sent a recording of this presentation, as well as the slides. And for those of you just watching this at home, you don't have to even join today to get the follow-up. So you'll be getting that even if you are not attending. A couple of just housekeeping things. If you do have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A, not just in the general chat, so that my colleagues Gretchen Giggin and Teresa can answer those questions and we make sure we get to them all. So please drop questions in the Q&A. And if you just have kind of introductions that you want to do to say hello, it's always nice to know who's here. So please feel free to drop a hello, where you are coming from, what institution you're at, what your role is in your name, if you want to, just to say hello in the chat. And I'll just start now by doing a brief introduction. So my name is Nadia Ortelt. I am the Strategic Partnerships Manager at the Center for Open Science. I have a background in science communication, research science, and neuroscience, and anthropology and archaeology. I've done a lot of different things, and I am very good at understanding what kind of problems you might have and how some of the tools that we build at the Center for Open Science might solve them or might not. So I'm usually the person that you'd first speak to who might be able to tell you if OSF for institutions or any of our other tools or products for administrators might be a good fit for your organization or institution. And I'll just say straight off the bat that today's kind of short dive into OSF for institutions is primarily directed at research support staff and academic librarians. But if you're just a researcher or help researchers in any way with their research, it might also be helpful for you. So I'll also introduce one of the other folks that are here in the call. So Gretchen Giggin is our member services manager. She is a brilliant librarian and would be your first point of contact after you became an OSF institutions member. So just want to that she's here and she can answer a wide range of questions you might have about the service or just about the OSF too. So please drop those questions in the Q&A. And with that, my other colleague, Teresa Vo, is going to just drop a quick Zoom survey with a couple of questions for everyone here. These are just helpful for me to understand your familiarity with the OSF as a platform, whether or not you have an OSF account, and how familiar you are with OSF institutions, which is a paid service that we offer for administrators on top of the OSF. So that will just be in the background while I continue speaking. And if you don't have an OSF account, I highly recommend, while I'm chatting now, take this time to quickly make an OSF account. It really takes about 2 seconds. You can link your ORCID ID. And if you're already coming here from an institution that is an OSF member, you can use single sign-on from that institution and connect your account so that you can make sure any public material you put on the platform is affiliated with your institution. If you have any other questions, again, while I'm speaking, easiest thing is probably just to Google OSF institutions, but you can also just go to our Center for Open Science main page and find our product pages. And again, make sure you make your free OSF account. It does not cost you anything. It will never cost an individual anything to make an OSF account. So what is the OSF? So we use the acronym OSF. It was originally called the Open Science Framework, but it's a bit of a misnomer because you don't have to be a scientist to use the OSF. variably, depending on how people use the OSF, they think of it either as a repository, so a place to store or archive data or material around research or any other kind of academic or publishing pursuit. They might think of it also as a collaboration tool. A lot of researchers and a lot of user base like the OSF because it provides a centralized location for them to work with other researchers or other people inside or outside of their institution. And there's also some folks who think of and use the OSF kind of like a publishing platform. So it's a way to publish preprints and other types of academic or sort of academic adjacent material, and create a graph of persistent identifiers to find that material. So you might hear me variably talking about the OSF either as a repository, a collaboration tool, or as a publishing platform. And that's because that kind of reflects a lot of users use it. And a lot of users at your institution now may be using it in that way. One thing I can flag now is that if you are coming and you're here as a research support staff or as a librarian from an institution, we can give you a bit of information about how many users you already have on the OSF, how many folks from your community are on the OSF, and we can give you some insight and ability to see that material on the OSF. So I'm able to share with you public material that has come from researchers in your community. So feel free and please do reach out to me to set up a call to talk about that. So I can show you a little bit of what's already happening on the OSF. And the reason that there are a number of users from your community using the OSF is because, as I mentioned, the OSF is free. And working on the OSF as an individual user, you have pretty much unlimited ability to create as many projects, registrations, or preprints as you'd like. So that's there's no cost in creating those, and there's no limit as an individual user. There are storage limits on a per project basis, but otherwise you have a lot of flexibility to create as many of these as you'd like. And if there's nothing else you take away from this call, remember that. So you can create as many projects, registrations, or preprints as you'd like. And these all have different features as part of the OSF. These are 3 different workflows on the OSF. And the sort of output of publishing a project, a registration, or a preprint looks different on the OSF. And I'll show you a couple examples of that, but you can see them here. The important thing to note, again, big picture, is that project spaces are extremely flexible. The downside is they can be deleted. You can mint a DOI for a project. Registrations, not as flexible, fairly rigid, limited number of updates on a registration, and they can never be deleted. You can also mint a DOI for a registration. And a preprint, which is the most recognizable probably workflow for those of you who are unfamiliar with the OSF. Preprint is a PDF with that utilizes the same metadata schema as our projects and registrations. You can also mint a DOI. And for each one of these workflows, we also offer some tools that allow you to aggregate or curate or moderate these different types of publishing workflows. If you have any questions about that, please do drop them in the Q&A. I believe, do we have a Q&A? Just checking. I don't actually see one, so I just wanted to check. Oh, we do. Okay. There's just no questions in there yet. Okay. So what is a project on the OSF? Projects are really flexible workspace, as I described before. I like to think of a project as a kind of sandbox. It's a really excellent place for a team to work together. I'll talk in a moment about integrations, but you can integrate and using our add-ons features, different citation tools, storage tools from lots of different contributors on a single project. So it can be a kind of centralized workspace where data and materials and information about a project can be organized in one place. And this is helpful because you may have some persistent identifiers that are affiliated with your project, but you may also need to link them to a number of other different types of material that exist in different repositories, different places across the web or across your kind of internal computing space. And this is a great place to be able to find and make discoverable all of that material, or some of it, with the rest being private. Activity logs can track changes. Privacy settings are quite fine-grained, so different components of a project can be made accessible to only collaborators, only a specific individual, or public to everybody. And you can add or remove collaborators at any time, and make sure also that affiliations from collaborators at multiple institutions are all added to a project. And once a project is public, you can mint a DOI for a project. A thing that is often a source of confusion, but I like to emphasize, is that a project is extremely flexible, and the downside of that is that information can be removed from a project by an individual user. So even though we offer administrative tools like OSF institutions, the entire kind of framework of the terms of use of the OSF are that individual users, named user, it's against our terms of use to have a user whose name is, for example, the Center for Open Science. It has to be a person. That person owns the material that they put on the OSF. So if they decide they want to remove material from the platform, they can do so in an OSF project. They can't do that with a registration. I'll talk about that in a second, but the project's flexibility does have a little bit of a downside, which is that material can be removed. So in that way, it operates very differently than an institutional repository where material is, in some cases, voluntarily uploaded, but then cannot be removed. As I noted, there's a lot of fine-grained permissions on OSF projects. You can also license projects and different components of a project in a flexible fashion. You can utilize our really robust metadata schema to make sure that different components or elements of a project are more fair or discoverable, both through our search and other repositories or aggregators or platforms. You can utilize that metadata to make sure that research outcomes, data, and files are all findable and discoverable. As I said, you can mint DOIs for public projects. You can sync your OSF account with an ORCID ID. And I'm also able to tell you, if you do reach out to me, how many of the users at your institution have synced ORCID records, which might be helpful for you. And because we're a nonprofit and open source, you can also, if you have engineering capacity, you can utilize our API to propagate any data or metadata you want downstream. So what's the difference between a project workflow and a registration workflow? So registrations are time-stamped archived objects on the OSF. We're not the only registry in town. There's many registries, many disciplines have their own discipline-specific registries. We also host a kind of tool on the OSF called OSF Registries, which is a community-operated registry. Many organizations want to moderate or curate their own grouping of registrations, and they've done so for a variety of reasons. Again, happy to talk with anybody who's interested in this. I think the use of a registration is a very one of the more radical open scholarship tools, and because of that is used in a lot of different ways, sometimes as a way to control access to data, sometimes as a way to demonstrate a commitment to replicability or reproducibility for funders, for example. Lots of different ways of using them. The important thing to note is that you cannot delete the entirety of a registration, and you only have a limited number of updates to a registration. The idea is that this is a very strong indicator that your research is, or that you are committed to open scholarship principles. One form of registration called a pre-registration can separate out your hypothesis generating exploratory part of the research from hypothesis testing or confirmatory part of the research. There's also a whole suite of downstream implications for creating registrations, including the use of a more, again, I would say radical tool of open scholarship called registered reports. It's a kind of peer review that happens before the publication of research, and a growing number of journals are utilizing registered reports for the publishing process. Again, happy to talk about that as well if you have any questions. Some of the really cool things about registrations on the OSF are highlighted here. So registrations on the OSF can be made in two ways, and this kind of fits into what we call the research life cycle. So researchers or collaborators or groups may decide to have a kind of messy project sandbox. Maybe it's entirely private, where they start gathering material, or maybe they've gathered a lot of material in other locations and they put it all in a project with the purpose of then creating a registration. So you can essentially fork any project into a registration, and take all of the metadata files and components from a project and turn that into a registration. Often workflows involve creating a project that's private or that's public, turning it into a registration or creating a registration from that project, then making the project private and making the registration the public face of the research project. Within a number of updates as the research is completed and outcomes are shared. They can also be created from scratch as well. So I'm not going to dive too much into OSF preprints. They are more commonly kind of understood publishing framework. We support also similarly to registrations, we support a preprint branded service. So if you're interested in starting up your own preprint service that is branded with your community, that has specific moderation framework or workflow, we can help support that. So do feel free to reach out if you're interested in that. We support a lot of different preprint services and have since COS started over 10 years ago. And I want to focus instead on OSF institutions, which is why probably many of you are here. So the primary thing to think about with OSF institutions is that what we are doing here is allowing for you as research support staff to have an automatic aggregation of all public material that users from your institution are publishing on the platform. And that includes the three workflows that I just discussed. So preprints, registrations, and projects. And the way in which we do that, and the way in which we confirm that users from your institution are in fact affiliated with your institution, is through single sign-on. So we work to set up single sign-on for the OSF, utilizing your single sign-on service, so that any users from your university would use that and then have all of the material that they've published on the platform auto-aggregate onto an OSF institutional page for your institution. I just have here an example of, on the bottom left is Case Western's institutional page, and on the right is the Case Western LibGuide that describes what the OSF is for their institution. They describe it as a cloud-based platform for storage sharing and version control of lots of different types of data, documents, and files, and as a collaboration tool. This is fairly common. Different institutions may err more towards describing it as a repository or a collaboration tool, as I noted before. The important thing to note is that the affiliation that happens when your users sign on using single sign-on applies to all of the material that is public. And we then provide you with information about that public material on the platform on our administrative dashboard. So you have some visibility into what's happening. If you want a little bit of that information up front before you think about signing up for OSF institutions, just reach out to me and I can give you some of that aggregated data and some of the material that your users might have put on the platform. Another thing that is relevant to think about with OSF institutions, and also just any OSF user, is that your institution may have existing storage tools that can expand the storage capacity of a single project, for example. And our add-ons allow for your users to integrate their Dropbox or Drive or OneDrive, Figshare, or Dataverse, or Box with their projects. And they can do that differentially by project, depending on what the collaboration is or what they need to link. And it expands the storage capacity of that material. It also helps make that material more findable. If the project is public and has a DOI, they're also using their ORCID ID to log in. And your institution has a membership that affiliates your ROR ID with their public material. Suddenly, material that may be in all of these existing tools that's linked to the DOI on their project is more discoverable, not just on the OSF, but elsewhere as well. And here's just an example of what that interoperability and those add-ons look like. You can see here that this is on a individual project, that there can be a linked GitHub repository. Here, there's also a linked Box, Google Drive, and Zotero library and folders. And you'll see this on your own when you click through the slides that are shared with you, but I'll just show you very quickly now. So this is an example of OSF institutional page for the University of British Columbia. And I just want to show you what happens. So on their institutional page, you can search by project, registration, preprints, also by files and users at the University of British Columbia. And if you were to look at a project that is affiliated with UBC Researcher, a UBC Researcher, you can see that there's the branding of UBC on that public project, and the metadata on this project also includes the ROR identifier for UBC, and that is populated downstream in DataCite as well. And you can see here, this is a registration affiliated with UBC, and it looks a little bit different, but the affiliated institution is right down here. And you can also see the branding for UBC. So that's an example of what would automatically happen for any of your affiliated users who sign on using single sign-on onto the OSF for your institution. And setting up this branded page really doesn't take that long at all, and depending on how your single sign-on service operates and what type of single sign-on your institution uses, we can get you set up relatively quickly to make sure that this material is all aggregated in one place. And I can show you also here, this is the DataCite Commons page that includes all of the material from UBC, including material that is published on the Open Science Framework. Okay. So one of the other things that's very exciting, because we've just launched a really big update to the backend. So, what you get as an administrator with an OSF Institutions membership. This is actually a mock-up from our I don't want to call it old because it's just been deprecated, but we have an update to our administrative dashboard, which is going to be released to all existing and new OSF institutional members in January, with a lot more data than an ability to kind of slice and dice and look at material, download material from your users on the back end. And that's kind of what we'd like to call more of a real-time metrics dashboard for administrators that you would have access to, and any administrators would have access to from your institution. And on the right here, you see an example of what we call kind of quarterly longitudinal metrics reports. And you would get these either on a quarterly or biannual basis, where you would also be able to set a time to speak with our member services manager, Gretchen Gigan, to kind of understand what that report means. Looking at, your users, what kind of trends are we seeing? What kind of things could be improved with maybe just some communication with existing OSF users from your institution? We're here to kind of make sure that you can set some goals for how you want to use it, institutional membership, to best suit your needs. I'll send through a couple of examples here of some current members and resources that we provide, some support pages made by some of our members that are, we think, really great, both on the OSF and within their own LibGuides. So you can have some examples of how other institutions use the OSF institutional membership. I also want to flag too, we have a lot of different types of case studies and blog posts around these case studies, recorded webinars. So if you're wondering how other institutions are using the OSF or what are best practices in supporting the use of OSF, we have a lot of them. This is just one example. I won't go into too much detail, but Virginia Commonwealth University has a really interesting way of making sure that the OSF is used by grad students through a data science series of courses for those grad students, which is based in their medical school, but is used by a number of other researchers, grad students across the school. And that ensures that there's always a steady baseline use of the OSF and understanding of the OSF by a community of researchers at the university. So a couple recaps. So membership for OSF institutions is for an academic institution. You can have as many individual administrators who have access to the metrics dashboard and quarterly reports, as well as different types of communication with Gretchen Gigan and our team. You also get help desk prioritization. So any users from your institution who are reaching out to us, we can answer their technical questions, but we can also work with you to make sure we forward any questions that are outside of our remit back to libraries or back to different staff who need to field those questions. That could be questions about research data management, around templates that you might want your researchers to use, or specific workflows that you might want them to use. We can make sure that that is communicated to them and to our help desk. You have a dedicated member services manager. You also have an initial training and onboarding that Gretchen, our member services manager, will lead for you and talk through with you in terms of understanding who your audience is for that onboarding. You also have access to administrative metrics dashboard. It's brand spanking new, and we've been working on it a long time. It's really exciting. That will be accessible to everybody starting in January. And as part of that new metrics dashboard release in January, you'll also be getting access to the next stage of that release, which is happening in 2025 and will be centered around a data curation role. So this is something that a lot of our current members and potential members have said to us is really important, the ability to collaborate with their researchers on making sure that the data that is in the OSF is correct and is there. And this would be a new role that would be released as part of a new feature in 2025. And as a member, you would have early access to that, as well as the possibility of providing more feedback to our engineering team on what your needs are there. And as I mentioned, you also have quarterly longitudinal metrics reports that give you as an administrator a little bit more of a long-term view on how users are utilizing the platform, both for collaboration and storage, for archiving and other types of repository-like or collaborative behaviors. So it's a way for you to have some insight into and visibility into what your community is doing. So again, to recap, OSF is free for users. There may be a number of different users who are already using the platform from your community. I'm happy to tell you about how many of them there are and to show you some examples of the material they're putting on the platform. A paid membership takes all of that material that's public that your community is already putting on the platform or has already put on the platform and will put on the platform and auto aggregates it and auto affiliates it with your institution. There's also other things that paid membership can get you as research support staff or as an organization or institution, including different types of customized training. There's actually a discount for OSF institutional members on extended training, which I'm happy to talk to you more about. You get a 25% discount on all of our training, open scholarship and OSF training. And if you're also interested in some of our other tools like OSF registries, OSF collections, or OSF preprints, you also get lots of additional features there, like, custom metadata, moderation, and curation. So that's just a kind of recap of what's the difference between paying for the OSF versus just using a free individual account. So annual membership pricing for OSF institutions is $4,999 a year. Everything else is an add-on. So if you want to add on training, you get 25% discount off of training. You can also just buy training on its own for yourself or for your community. There's additional storage that we can also add on for OSF institutions, custom domains, etc. So happy to talk about any of that if you're interested. And just leaving here to end us off with my email address is just nadja@cos.io. And Gretchen Gigan is Gretchen@cos.io. Gretchen's also here, has been answering some questions. And I'm just going to look in the chat really quickly. Let's see if there's any questions. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. If you have any questions about, for example, other institutions that might be similar to yours, if you're an R1 or an R2 institution, if you're a research hospital, if you are a research group within a larger organizational or institutional context, I can really point you in a lot of different directions that might help you understand how OSF institutions or our other tools might work for you. So Anna, I'm just looking at a couple of the questions. Anna said, can you please provide examples of projects that utilize OSF for the whole research cycle? I can do that. Anna, if you can make sure to send me an email, just send it right now and I will send that to you. Also make sure that that gets sent out to everybody in the Slack. Unless Gretchen, you have that pulled up and you want to just drop it, drop it in the chat. The other question we have is, can you say more about the funding source and business model for OSF? Yeah, so the OSF is part of a larger nonprofit organization called the Center for Open Science, COS, a lot of acronyms going on here. So the Center for Open Science is a nonprofit organization that's been around for about 10 years. It emerged out of a Brian Nosek, who's a faculty at the University of Virginia, social psychologist, and emerged out of a lot of work that he had done around replicability and reproducibility of sort of canonical social psychology experiments. And the Center for Open Science has a lot of different arms. One is the OSF, so an infrastructure software platform that enables open scholarship practices. We also have a training arm. We have a research arm that basically does scientific research, peer-reviewed research into the practices of open scholarship to understand what works and what doesn't. We have a policy arm, and we have a lot of other sort of teams. So OSF operates within a nonprofit. It's a kind of arm of that nonprofit. So our revenue comes from grants, individual donations, donations from larger organizations. We have federal grants, and also from our services that we offer as part of our product. So all the services that I'm talking about today. And I believe Gretchen is answering this last question by Rob. So has OSF attempted to integrate with RDM-focused ELN systems like RSpace? I will let Gretchen answer that question.
I can just answer it live if you
sure.
want.
Yeah.
So not at present, we don't have any formal integrations with any electronic lab notebooks. However, we did receive an award from the NSF last year, 3 years of funding to redo the way all of our integrations with OSF work, in order to make it much simpler to create new ones and to have community contributions of them. So the idea is that now we have integrations with storage providers, and citation managers. But in the future, we will have a more general kind of API that anybody can write an integration with OSF. So electronic lab notebooks are on the list of things that we have been kind of factoring into our requirements as we develop that. So in the next year or two, you should see, more if you pay attention to our Center for Open Science newsletters or other parts of our communication, you should hear more about those projects.
So with that, I think that we have answered all the questions. Oh, no, there's a couple more. So Anna, it depends on what the workflows are for your IRs. Often, I think almost in all of the cases are, except for a handful that do not have institutional repositories for various reasons, some of which are budgetary, and some have to do with the size of the research communities at the institution. But almost all institutions use OSF alongside an institutional repository for some of the reasons that I outlined. Okay. Thank you everybody for joining. We're gonna hop off. You will be getting a recording as well as the slides from today's presentation. Feel free right now to just shoot me an email or Gretchen an email with any other questions you may have, or just to say hello or set up a demo. We can show you some of the back end, the administrative panel. I can also show you a bit about, or share a bit about users at your institution and what they're putting on the platform. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you elsewhere.